Tanong, anong kalalabasan kapag pinagsama mo ang baboy at ang politiko? Sagot, imposible yon. Kahit ang baboy, may mga bagay na hindi kaya ang tiisin. May isang bus na puno ng politiko na nahulog sa bangin. Isang matanda lang ang nakakita. Siya na rin ang naglibing. Kinabukasan dumating ang mga pulis. Tinanong nilang matanda, patay na ba lahat? Sagot ng matanda, sabi ng iba, buhay sila. Pero alam mo naman ang mga politiko, sinungaling. Nag-usap ang 3 bilanggo sa kulungan. Sabi ng 2 bilanggo sa pinakamatanda, balita namin malapit ka nang makalabas. Titino ka na nga ba o babalik ka sa Senado pag-alaya mo? Sabi nila kapag may cancer ka, mamamatay ka na. Pero gusto kong ipakita sa inyo na I can survive. The title of this speech is, Will the 2016 candidates commit plunder? Mag-aalala na tayo sa 2016. Kung kaya iboboto natin sa ihalal bilang presidente, vice-presidente, senador, at local government officials. Pag binoto natin sa 2016, meron pa tayong garansya na hindi sila magnanakaw ng impact na pera na tinatawag na plunder. Kaya pag-usapan natin dito sa Junior Public Relations Practitioners Symposium. By the end of this year, we shall enter into the campaign period for the 2016 elections. With so many pending cases for plunder and corruption against high-profile political leaders, common sense dictates that as scholars, we need to examine the culture of corruption, its sources, its mindsets, and whether the candidate we vote for might present a profile of corruption as a work in progress. Kailangan alamin natin muna, ito ba mga kandidato na ito? Malamang ba sa magnanakaw ito pag nahalal natin? Hindi naman popularity contest ang halalan kung hindi naghanap tayo ng pinakamagaling. Kung baga sa mga eskwela, ang valedictorian dapat ang inahalal natin. Paano natin malaman na magnanakaw pala ang kandidato? Lalo na kung marami siyang TV ads na napakamahal pero kaya-kaya niya. Saan niya kinukuha yung pera na yon? It will surprise you to know that in the entire Asia, one country has the highest number of anti-corruption measures, and that country is the Philippines. Tayo ang pinakamaraming batas laban sa korupsyon. And yet, according to the 2013 Corruption Perception Index, among 177 countries, the Philippines is ranked number 94. The Philippines was among the first countries to ratify the United Nations Convention Against Corruption in 206. Yet it has been estimated that the Philippine economy loses at least 20% of our annual national budget to corruption. Naturally, corruption limits the ability of public officials to improve the economy with the use of foreign aid. According to an expert, there are 4 sources of corruption. Bakit ba naman napaka-corrupt nitong mga opisyal natin? Meron din korupsyon sa ibang bansa, pero may kamukha dito na halos lahat sila nangungurakot. Ano sa tingin ninyo? Anong pinanggagalingan ng korupsyon sa ating bansa? May pagkukulang talaga kaya ang mga Pilipino? Ang genetic identification ng Pilipino kaya merong marka or marker na magiging corrupt tayo? Here are the sources of corruption. The first source of corruption is vicarious learning, during which people follow the examples of their leaders. Bata ka pa lang, nakikita mo ng mga magulang mo, o mga kapitbahay mo, na nagnanakaw ng pera, hindi binabalik ng tamang sukli. Ay di susunod ka rin. Yun ang tinatawag na vicarious learning. The second source is what psychiatrists call the principle of desensitization, meaning that plunder starts with small cases of graft. Umpisa sa maliit na bagay hanggang sa malaki na yan. Kaya dapat maliit pa lang tayo, pinapakitaan na tayo sana ng ehemplo na napaka-importante nang hindi natin kinukuha, maski gaano kadali ang pagkakataon. Once you begin to accept petty corruption, you become desensitized to it. This source should make us reflect and strive to show integrity even in the most simple things. The third source of corruption is rationalization, meaning that people justify their behavior in ways such as the following. Depersonalization by saying that victims deserve corruption. Yun ang sinasabi ng ibang mga politiko. Maski daw corrupt sila, our Filipino people or our voters deserve a corrupt government. Ang lakas ng loob nila magsabi ng ganyan. Or selective weighting by saying, I'm not so bad. Kinukumpara nila ang sarili nila sa iba. At maski inaamin nila na nakaw sila, sa tingin nila, hindi naman gano'ng kasama yun dahil yung iba mas malaki pa ang nakaw nila. Or giant by saying, the end justifies the means. That has got to be one of the cheapest sources of mental dishonesty in the history of mankind, to say that the end justifies the means. Or the metaphor of the ledger by saying, by good works offset corrupt acts. The fourth source of corruption is learned helplessness, which happens when an honest person enters government but becomes socialized to perform and accept the corrupt practices. For example, members of Congress will eventually discover that they can gather more power for themselves by cutting illegal deals. This learned helplessness is aggravated by the lack of reinforcement. Public officials in our country, both at the national and at the local levels, engage in corruption because our anti-corruption laws so far in most cases are not actually implemented, and those who are guilty are not punished as they deserve. Kaya corrupt itong bansa na ito eh. Kasi marami tayong batas, tayo pinakamaraming batas sa buong Asya. Pero hindi naman sinusunod ang batas. Karaniwan, pinapakita lang nila ang abilidad nila na mag-iwas ng batas. Kaya nakikita ito ng komunidad o ng publiko. A study made by an expert showed that Filipinos believe corruption is difficult to eradicate precisely because it is those in power who engage in it or because the problem is too deeply rooted to change. Those are the sources of corruption. Nakikita natin sa paligid natin. Nilakihan natin ng ganon. At pag nasa opisina tayo, nakikita natin na kung magdaya ka pala, ang muna ka. Now let us go to the personality traits of people who are corrupt. Ano bang katangian ng mga tao at mga kandidato na napapakita na malamang sa kung ihalal natin sila sa 2016, magiging nanakaw lang sila? How can we tell whether the candidate will likely commit plunder and corruption if elected to office? We should watch out for the following personality traits. Paano natin malaman ng isang kandidato ng gwapo-gwapo sa television ay magnanakaw lang pala pag nahalal na natin? Una, maski superficial ang pagkagwapo niya, kung titigan mo ng mabuti, ang pangit ng gagawin yun. Kasi makikita mo sa mukha ng tao ang buhay niya eh. Kaya kung alam niya na masama at krimen at lamang yan kasalanan na ginagawa niya, malilitaw rin yan sa mukha niya, maski gaano makapal ang makeup niya. Maliban yan, napansin ko, ang pinakamahilig mag-English na mali ay yung mga kurap. Akala mo sino ang yayabang. Ayun pala, kung pakinggan mo ng mabuti, mali palang drama ng mga gago. Watch out for the Machiavellian person. This refers to a person with a mindset characterized by the manipulation and the need for power. Watch out for the trait of narcissism. which refers to an inflated sense of self-importance and grandiosity. Kung bang ang yabang niya sa television, akala mo alam niya lahat, o akala mo ay siya ang pinakamarunong sa buong Kongreso. Watch out for subclinical psychopathy, which results from an aggregate of maladaptive trait deficits linked to antisocial deviance. Yung mga antisocial na mga tao, mukhang galit sa mundo. Yan malamang magiging corrupt yan. O kaya, kung napakamahal ng suot niya sa TV, lahat na lang purong ginto ang suot niya. Kumikintaban ang mga gamit niya. Ibig sabihin, corrupt yan. Saan niya kukuha ng ganyang pera, pamilya ng ganon? Hindi naman ganyan kalaki ang sweldo ng senador. Tapos lahat pa sila, mga anak nila sa abroad, nila pinag-eskwela. Bakit hindi dito? Bakit hindi sa pamatasan ng lungsod ng Maynila? A university known for academic excellence, and proving therefore that money is not the only criterion for academic excellence. Saka pala, if there is a bill to increase the appropriation for this university, will you please give me a call? Watch out for weak moral identity and primitive moral thinking. Weak moral identity, as exhibited by the candidate who values personal loyalty over former rules and does not distinguish between organizational and personal goals. In short, let me summarize the character traits of candidates prone to plunder. Highly neurotic individuals. Senado, may mga neurotic dyan. Future orientation, power distance, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, social dominance orientation, moral disengagement. Moral disengagement, nilayo mo sa sarili mo ang krimen mo ng plunder. Halimbawa, sometimes this person commits an act of corruption by morally disengaging himself from the corruption by justifying the act using palliative comparisons. Itong ibig kong sabihin. For example, the person linked to plunder will continue to receive kickbacks on the reasoning that the kickback is very small compared with the earnings of a convicted plunderer. Kaya, matitiis mo ba yung kanyang pagrarason na yan? Kung konti lang naman yung kanya, yung ibang laki-laki, kaya pwede na rin yung kanya. Another method to assuage the conscience is to avoid using the word bribe and using euphemistic labels such as padulas or pamirienda. The most notorious act of plunder in our country is the abuse of the pork barrel system. Yun ang talagang limpak-limpak na pera ng ating gobyerno. Daang milyon ang nanakaw. Isang pirmahan lang. Isang usapan lang nila. Diyan napupunta ang pera ng ating gobyerno. Madalas sinasabi natin, mahirap tayong gobyerno. Hindi totoo yun. Mayaman tayo sa likas na kayamanan. Ang sanhi na tunay ng ating pagkamahirap na bansa, hindi sa kulang tayo sa likas na kayamanan, kundi kulang tayo sa tapang at sa lakas ng loob na kalabanin natin itong mga kandidato na ito at huwag natin silang iboto maski gaano karami ang advertisements nila sa kampanya na darating. Pakinggan nyo, itong mga nagsasabi nito, mga plunderer ito. Halimbawa, pagtungkol sa pork barrel, kamukha ng sinabi nila, tumayo ako sa Senado na magsabi may pork barrel itong budget ninyo, sinasabi nyo wala, meron. At mali-mali ang definition ng savings para makuha nyo agad-agad ang pera, hindi tunay na savings. Kagad-agad sa sagot-sagot sila, kamukha na ginawa nila sa akin. Sabi nila, this is a legitimate government process of long-standing. Ang sagot nila sa akin, matagal na yan eh. O di tama yan. Isa pang sagot, the consequences are minimal and my practice will speed up and directly deliver services to my constituents. Matagal pang proseso kung marami pang papel, bigay mo na lang sa akin, ako na mamumuntun sa mga kapitbahay ko. I am not abusing the people's money, but I am using what is due to me and intended to be distributed among my constituents. Yun ang problema sa mga politiko na ito. Nakaw sila ng nakaw at makikipagrason Yun ang nga rason. Yun ang rason ng taong hindi nag-eskwela sa lungsod ng pamantasan ng Maynila. How to choose the president? It is unfair to generalize by saying that people in developing countries like the Philippines are more likely prone to corruption than in developed countries. Hindi totoo na kung taga-developing country ka, mas madali kang magnakaw nang sa taga-developed country ka. The truth of the matter is that corruption is more widespread in developing countries simply because of poverty, low public sector salaries, little accountability, and poorly enacted laws and principles of ethics. Notwithstanding the plethora of laws passed by the Philippines against corruption, it has become institutionalized and accepted. Corruption in our country is not necessarily associated with the country's intent to be unethical or immoral. Rather, corruption is thematic because it has become a routine practice in the conduct of daily business. This is why it is of the utmost importance to choose the best possible president and other national officials in the 2016 elections. Many studies show that one of the most critical aspects of culture is the moral tone and examples set by leadership. Unfortunately, unethical leaders tend to attract more attention than unethical ones, and unethical leaders tend to influence employee behavior. Kaya napakahalaga itong ating darating na halalan dahil ang leadership, ang pinaka-leader doon sa tuktok, siya, pangkaraniwan, ang nagdidikta ng klima ng ating lipunan. Kung bang matino yung leader na yon, magiging matino din yung kasamahan niya. Pero kung paubaya, pwedeng hindi siya nanakaw, pero yung iba pinapabayaan niya magnakaw. Anong klaseng gobyerno yon? As members of the educated sector of society, it is your duty to examine with logic and reason the various candidates who will present themselves. Naglalakbasan na sila eh. Tatakbo daw silang presidente. O titigan natin sila mabuting-mabuti. Authorities say that if we give power to good people, they're able, more than others, to enact moral identity, meaning to do what is right. The best way to identify the best president is to develop a sense of moral identity, meaning the degree to which you think it is important to your sense of self to be caring, compassionate, fair, generous, etc., shaped by your response to feelings of power. Ang importante sa halalan ay ganito, yung sarili nating kalooban. Kung sa tingin natin, napaka-importante na maging honest ang tao. Maski hindi siya gwapo, nakamukha ng artista. Maski hindi siya sports star. Maski matamlay lang siya magsalita. Pero makikita mo sa mukha at sa pagkilos niya, at lalo na sa kanyang record, kanyang curriculum vitae, na magaling pala siya, hindi siya iboto natin. Huwag tayo magpadala-dala ng mga pag-aartista. It is an axiom that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But it's not entirely correct. Power does not corrupt. It heightens pre-existing ethical tendencies. It's not really true that power corrupts. If you are already inclined to be corrupt, then power will really corrupt you. Therefore, you must examine every candidate and ensure that he or she is equipped with a record of academic excellence, professional excellence, and achievements recognized on the national level or even on the international level. Kaya, itiin na natin itong pagsasalita ito. Sinong dapat magiging kasunod na presidente? Una, may academic excellence siya. Valedictorian ba siya? Valedictorian man siya, hindi siya nag-cheat, hindi siya nangungopya. Pangalawa, kung maganda yung record niya bilang estudyante, meron ba siyang record of professional excellence? Hinangaan ba siya kung ano man ang nangyari sa kanya, naging doktor, naging abogado, naging engineero, arkitekto, o nurse man? Yan ba ay pinupuri siya ng mga kasamahan niya na may nagawa siyang mabuti sa kanyang hanap buhay? At pinanglakan ba ng publiko, ng kanyang mga kasamahan, ang mga ginawa niyang maganda sa serbisyo? It is the character and the political will of the next president that will determine that we can rise to the challenge of the day. Let us take the following actions. We should provide more protection for whistleblowers. We should grant more transparency and access to information. We should strengthen our weak political party system. We should reduce the involvement of politicians in appointment system. Palitan na natin yung sistema na para makakuha ka ng posisyon sa gobyerno, kailangan may sulat ka sa politiko. Ano naman alam ng politiko doon? Hindi dapat, kung sinong pinakamataas sa eskwela, pinagmataas sa civil service exam, dapat ganun ang kukunin ka agad. We should reduce the executive power of the executive branch. We need to rationalize government bureaucracy. We need to raise wages of those in government. We need to improve enforcement, investigatory, and prosecution ability of law enforcement agencies. Conclusion. Is there something that you can do as an individual? Definitely yes. Here are the ways by which you can shape popular communication to help combat the culture of corruption. Highlight role models and those who fight against corruption in order to counteract stereotypes instead of simply managing the public images of politicians. Kayong mga junior public relations practitioners, magiging trabaho nyo, pinapagwapo nyo ang kandidato nyo. Hindi lang yun dapat. Kung hindi, dapat talaga ay maghanap ka ng mga taong alam mo dapat kaangaan at pwedeng ipatulad talaga sa ating mga kabataan. Help educate the Filipino voter on the character of candidates and ensure they select those with integrity and political will. Advocate for reform in our systems and structures through media in general and in social media in particular. Mag-aktibo kayo sa social media. Kung sabihin mo kawatan yung tao yun, sabihin mo nga. Kaya mo naman yun eh. Para mahiya naman sila. Halimbawa dito sa budget na ito, sabihin nyo sa mga congressman, mga senador, hindi na kayo nahiya? Gusto nyo magkaroon na naman kayo ng work balance? Sinabi ng Korte Suprema, illegal yan, magnanakaw na naman kayo. We have to prepare ourselves for the great battle for good governance that is represented by the 2016 elections. But, in the end, as I end my speech, it is always good to call on the protection of God, and so I recite with you in the words of the poet, may the road rise to meet you, may the wind ever be at your back, may the good Lord keep you in the hollow of his hand, may your heart be as warm as your hearthstone, and when you come to die, may the wail of the poor be the only sorrow you will always leave behind. May God bless you all. Thank you.